You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host.
Welcome everybody. It is a new year, 2024, and it's also very exciting, a new season 6 for Inspire Change with Gunter. So again, let me welcome you very warmly. Now this is a podcast where we dive deep into the heart of what it is to be a man in today's world, or what it should be, perhaps. However, I'm not confined just to men's issues. I'm going to, do a little bit of sort of side travelling into related issues. Now, I want you to remember that they're related. They're just not going to be a segue. So one of the things I want to do this season is to embark on a thought-provoking journey where I want to focus on redefining masculinity and looking at it through the lens of psychology, anthropology, personal transformation, a bit of sociology, possibly a little bit of archaeology, but certainly from an interdisciplinary point of view. At Macquarie University, they have a course, or had a course, I'm not sure, I need to check that, called The Big History. Well, what I want you to think about is that I'm going to be doing, in a sense, a big history of masculinity and see what that really tells us about what it is to be a man. Not male, but what it is to be a man. Good, great, indifferent. We're going to cover as many aspects of this as possible. So I'm your host, Gunter, and I want to invite you to join me as we really dig into unraveling the complex tapestry of male identity and all that goes with it. Because remember, as men, we're not living in or on an island, and we are not an island unto ourselves. In the past seasons, I've tried to explore various facets of masculinity. A little bit of a historical take on it. But the key thing that I'm interested in, and that I have in my life's work fundamentally come to believe, is that the struggles we're going through socially and psychologically fundamentally to come down to patriarchal norms. And so as men, we are both the victors but also the victims of that ideology. Now this season, I want to take this a step further. Inspired by the Making Good Men Great framework that I put together, I want us to challenge the conventional narratives, dissecting and reconstructing what it means to be a man. So in that process, what I'm going to be doing is each week I'm going to confront the pillars of traditional masculinity. And as you know, if you're a listener from previous seasons, they are about territory, hierarchy, acquisition, competition, and combativeness. If you look at, patriarchal cultures and patriarchal communities, that's what you are going to see driving the interpersonal relationships in those communities. In that, I want to scrutinise these concepts, and not just to dismiss them, but to understand their impact and how we can evolve beyond them. Because that is what we need to do. We cannot continue to operate as we have for millennia, 8,000 to 10,000 years. we've come to a point in our existence where we are literally at a make it or break it point. If you doubt that, think about why it is that in the Western civilization that we have, and especially in the English-speaking countries like the UK, Australia, and the United States, we are seeing a deterioration of physical, mental, and social health. Conflicts are increasing. In many countries, war has broken out in a way that 25, 30, 40 years we mightn't have thought about. We might not have perceived that that was going to be a likelihood. But again, if you dig into it, one of the things that stands out is that the major conflicts are around leaders that are strongly patriarchal, the strong men. That includes people like Putin, Trump, Netanyahu, the alliances that these men have with other patriarchs. And, you know, we might sort of go, well, it's not just men, there's also women. And I agree. There are also women involved and enrolled in the ideology, in patriarchy. They get a benefit out of it. It is short-lived, admittedly, but they do tend to get a benefit out of it. So, what comes next? Well, one of the other things that I want to do to make it really, really interesting is I want to put together a monthly special that's 50 minutes to an hour long, and that's going to feature conversations with people who are interesting, who have taken a journey that's not the ordinary. And it's not just men. I want to talk to women as much as I want to talk to men as well, because ultimately, perhaps what we need to come to understand is that if we over-focus purely on our gender, whether that's male or female, or in between, or whatever, we are going to fundamentally get stuck because that process is divisive. If we are really wanting to be truly inclusive, then we need to go beyond these social categories and understand the humanity of us. And so in that context, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of spirituality, about philosophy. How can we perceive ourselves within the fabric of our communities and our civilization as something more than what we've had? I'll give you a good example. You know, we've been struggling with the idea of what consciousness is. Well, you know, there's now evidence, or there's a theory that seems to provide fairly strong evidence that consciousness is an artifact of quantum processes. Okay, so we sort of plugged into the universe, as it were. Is the universe conscious? Who knows? But what it tells me is that the idea that it's just an I experience is actually fundamentally a nonsense. You know, the neoliberal idea of individualism, that it's all about me, and, you know, we have that problem in our society. You know, the me generation, you know, the selfies, the selfishness, the increase of narcissism in our community is evidence that this stuff has gotten into our way of being, and it has a detrimental impact because it's not just about me. It is about I and I coming together, connecting. The Rastas don't use the word where they talk about I and I. And there's an interesting reason for that. I won't go into that now, but I think it's worthwhile contemplating. Language fundamentally shapes our perception of what we believe to be reality. But is it reality? You know, I work with people who have certain differences neurologically. Okay, so let's talk about the idea of neurodiverse. Interesting thing is that I think we're all somewhat neurodiverse. It's just some of us are more than others. And in that, some people can't actually truly hold a visual picture in their mind, a fantasia. Right? Some people perceive elements and put elements together that a lot of other people can't. They see connections in things. Other people see music. They see, when they hear something, they see a colour. So there's lots of different variations on how we construct the world that we live in and we interact with. The reality is that there's no such thing as out there because it's all in my mind. My mind processes all the different, limited sensory stimulus out there. If I was a dog, I could smell a whole lot more than I can as a human being. Same with hearing. If you watch a cat, their ears are going, scanning their environment. And interestingly enough, in some ways, human beings can actually train these senses to operate on different levels. I know this from a person who's doing work in a sort of form of echolocation as a blind person. And it is mind-boggling. So why am I talking about this? Because most of us have a very narrow two-dimensional perspective of what is and what is possible. And I want to stimulate some thought, some reflection, some contemplation to stepping up and stepping out in a way that is going to be of benefit, not just to yourself, but to others. I think that this is a time, and I've, I was reading an article of a cancer researcher who has cancer himself, whose idea is that most of us should be thinking more about what we can contribute to the community, not what we can get for ourselves. Now, for some people, that's sort of a little bit, heretical because it is all about them. And unfortunately, they've sort of crept and seduced leadership into that idea so that other leaders follow along. And it's not just, I'm not just talking about the politicians who are greedy and, ripping the system off. I'm actually talking about those of so much wealth, like the Musks, the Bezos, the 1 to 5% who influence what's supposed to be a democracy so that it becomes a hegemony, that it becomes a rule by interest groups. It's one of the reasons why we're struggling with the idea of being stewards over the planet rather than coming from a place of ownership. So in the framework of making good men great, I'm not just talking about you as an individual bloke being better. I'm talking also, and I'm challenging you to consider yourself a human being that can make a contribution. And don't believe that you need to be rich, a genius, or, so well connected and famous that that's when you can make a difference. Difference happens in various scales along the spectrum. Remember the pebble in the pond, the ripple effect. These things, you never know what you're going to unleash. And hopefully it's something that is constructive, that's evolutionary, not revolutionary. My experience of checking out history and looking at revolutions is they destroy more than what they create as a benefit. These things usually are short-lived, they are not sustainable, people suffer, and the suffering continues, and we have generations of traumatized people. So the idea of, the French Revolution or, the Spanish Revolution and all these things are simply over when, the varying leaders die is not true. In many respects, I could argue that in today's geopolitical landscape, we are seeing a resurgence of the ultra-right that has been sitting there since the days of National Socialism in Germany and Stalinism in Russia, all waiting to regain a foothold. Italy, still reveres, at least some Italians still revere Mussolini. It's hard to believe, but it's there. And then you have the Holocaust deniers. And then you have the complex situation between Israel and Palestine. And, the need to understand that Palestinians don't necessarily equate with terrorists like Hezbollah and Hamas. We need to be able to differentiate better. We need to be able to understand dynamics better. It's not a simple binary thing. They're good, they're bad. But when you go on killing sprees, with no conditions, no concept of any form of humanity, that's when you lose, in my view, the right to have a voice on a democratic table or in a democratic forum. Now, my view is we can begin to make a difference by beginning within the home to teach, to model behaviours that are healthy. Much of aggression and violence arises from deprivation, from being abused, from being traumatized, from being disenfranchised from political and economic participation. When I look at currently what's going on in the United States, they're busily trying to juggle, and play around with, who can vote and who can't vote, gerrymandering. This is not a democracy. As much as the United States likes to promote itself as a democracy, it lost that a long time ago, possibly never had it because it was established as a republic. I'm going to pull up here because I'm getting onto my soapbox, but I think these things are really important because they're interconnected. It's a bit like saying, depression is the result of your biochemistry being out of whack in your brain. In my view, that is an extraordinarily limited way of looking at what is going on for a person who's experiencing clinical depression. That's not all to the story. There is lots of stuff. There's the social environment the person lives in, the experiences that they've had, the beliefs about themselves, the care and nurture that they might have had or had not as a child. So all these things I want to begin to examine much more closely and deeply so that you have an opportunity to get a broader picture, to think critically, because what we're being told in the media is two-dimensional. It's binary and it's two-dimensional, and a lot of the times it's just clickbait. So through conversations with others, through connecting with others, I want to broaden this out. I want to also then dive deeply into it. So whether you're a long-time listener or joining us for the first time, I want you to prepare for a season of powerful narratives, some scholarly insights and passionate discussion. Certainly you're going to get the passion from me. And together we'll be on this journey. Remember, as Dr. Mark Williams says, as human beings, we're the connected species, but we have unfortunately let that go. So in the next month, I'm going to cover a couple of topics like, how do we define modern masculinity? How do we get beyond the stereotypes? Let's unpack patriarchy some more. Let's look at the pillars of it. Let's rethink success that isn't bound by the acquisitional mindset of patriarchy. And then let's look at the relevance of competition and how combativeness fits into the male dynamic. People often say, well, I'm not ambitious and I'm not really competitive and I don't like fighting. Well, in some respects, I understand that. But, we need to understand why we do that. Is it because we're feeling so disempowered? When I speak about topics that are somewhat controversial outside of the norm, I'm actually already, encouraging some form of, healthy combativeness. But what I'm mainly talking about is when competition and combativeness is off the scale and toxic, right? But as you know, from my perspective, human beings, first and foremost, are and need to be cooperative. There's no harm in me competing with myself in sport or in my craft or in my studies or whatever it is that I want to excel in, that I have aspirations for. But it's not there. I'm not doing it to beat somebody else. Even that word implies a certain combativeness. So on that note, I hope I've inspired you already to come along on the journey with me and bring others along. Have them tune into the podcast, create points of discussion, sit down with one another. This is not just for you to plug in your AirPods or your headphones, listen, and then go on your merry way. These are points of connection and opening doors to dialogue, to discussion, to rhetoric. I take, and sometimes this is difficult, I take time to listen to people who I completely disagree with. Now, immediately some of you are going to go, oh, yeah, that's Andrew Tate and that's Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson's a little bit outside the box because in terms of whatever he talks about psychologically, I don't have too much of a problem with him. I get a little bit off colour when he starts talking about stuff that is fundamentally outside of his expertise. And clearly, he's not as well educated in philosophy, he's not as well educated in biology, evolutionary biology or evolutionary psychology as he may think. And that's where I go, and the gender issues that he talks about and the way that he talks about, I have a problem. There are some points where I go, no, I agree with him. So please don't just create an echo chamber. We need to learn to actively listen and actively speak from a point of having heard, from a point of empathy and understanding. Doesn't mean I agree with the person's position. But in order to be able to have conversation and dialogue, I need to be respectful and I need to be cooperative in the process of unpacking that. And, that can come under a little title called civility. And unfortunately, that one's gone out the door for a while. So join me next week for the first of a series on understanding masculinity. You're really beginning to reimagine what masculinity could be really about in a healthy way. So until next time, until next week, I'm hoping that you are going to come along, join me, listen, and take it to others. Because that's the mission for this year, is to spread the word, to get it out there. That we can be different, we can be healthier physically, mentally, spiritually than what we currently are collectively. I know some of us are doing great work individually, but I think we need to start getting it out there. So until next time, this is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.gunterswoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.